Once we started looking at the bottlenecks in the department and tracking the metrics of when the vendor trays were going to be there and where the other bottlenecks occur in the department, we actually went to a more staggered scheduling. So instead of the traditional A, B, and C, we staggered. You don't need your full A shift necessarily at 7 o'clock in the morning. You need somebody to come in and get the test done, somebody to get the ORs what they need. But then you stagger your shift as they come in so that you have the extra bandwidth when you have those congested periods of time, whether in decon or in assembly.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal to help you fight dirty every instrument, every time. Whether you are tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go Beyond Clean.
On this episode of Beyond Clean, we're talking to Tracy Raymond, the Manager of Education and Training at Vested Medical, and Jen Barnickel, the Manager of Operations at Vested Medical, talking about the metrics of excellently managing vendor trays. And Bobby, this is a conversation that, I guess it's important, right? There's some people out there talking about it.
Understatement of the year. Yeah, Hank, this whole season is about data and the importance of data in sterile processing. And if there was one slice of sterile processing that is just bereft of good data, it's managing vendors. Even for places that have good systems in place to capture the data, we're using workarounds and all sorts of things and just not collecting that. So this is going to be a really good one.
It's one, if you're going to do a season on data and not mention vendor data, then we would be doing a disservice to that topic. Before we get into the interview, though, I do want to give a quick shout out to the Beyond Clean vendor management expert, Jeff Wirtz. So you've probably been listening to him and reading his content over the last 18 months or so as our resident expert on this topic. But if you haven't tracked him down, go to beyondclean.net and look up the expert series tab. You can track down him, Jeff Wirtz, on that page to find a lot of these kinds of conversations. We're talking today to the frontline sterile processing clinicians. You're going to get that perspective. But Jeff's speaking from the vendor side and all the technology and all the best practices. So definitely worthy of checking out too if you're interested in this topic. All right, with that, just hang with us one moment and we'll be right back with Tracy and Jen.
I'm Justin Poulin.
And I'm Hank Balch.
From 17 Studios, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
And joining us now in studio is Tracy Raymond, the Manager of Education and Training at Vested Medical, and Jen Barnickel, the Manager of Operations at Vested Medical. And we're going to be talking, ladies, about the metrics of excellently managing your vendor trays. I want to thank you both for joining us in the podcast. It's not the first time that you've been on the Beyond Clean platforms, but it's the first time we've had you on the podcast. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. So excited to be here. Definitely.
So vendors and trays and data, it is a hot topic, one of the hottest topics out there in this space today. And we're going to talk about some of the intersections here because y'all have got some really interesting background, not only in your past, but also in your current employment for what it is you're actually doing sterile processing wise in the interaction with the vendors and with trays and with managing all that. So very interesting topic and insight, but I'm going to let y'all tell us what it is that you're doing and where you came from, maybe how you got into the sterile processing space. Let's start first with Tracy.
All right. I basically fell into sterile processing, which I think many of us have, and found that it was my passion. I've been in the field for almost 30 years, worked my way up from a tech and traveled for a bit, landed in Illinois. So I've worked my way up the field. I have a passion for education and training to elevate the future sterile processing techs.
I love it. And what about you, Jen?
Well, I fell into it as well. I went on a mission trip to Haiti with a friend of mine, and he told me, hey, you should be a surgical tech. And I looked at him, and he was a surgeon, and I said, you're nuts, I'll pass out. Well, he brought me into the OR down in Haiti because third world country is a little easier on the restrictions, and said if I could handle the sights, sounds, and smells down there, then I could handle anything I would see in the United States. So I came back and quit my job as a video store manager and went to school to be a scrub tech. I was a scrub for about 5 years and did everything at the surgery center that I didn't have to have an RN for. So sterile processing, endoscopy, reprocessing, all that fun stuff. Then I was snatched up to be the OR liaison at the hospital. You know, OR liaison is the official title, but I call it rep wrangling.
That's probably true too.
Yes. Then I moved up the chain into management and rehabbed the department through a full renovation. I did, after my position was eliminated due to a merge, I spent some time at Amazon as a operations manager with Amazon. So that gave me the perfect background to join Vested Medical when the opportunity arose, because Vested Medical is unique in this space in that we bridge the gap between manufacturing and the hospital as far as vendors. We're a third-party off-site reprocessing facility, so the vendors give us the trays, we reprocess them and deliver them sterile to the hospital for use, so it takes the burden off of the individual facilities. That's one of the aspects of Vested Medical.
Yeah, that's a great segue, right? Because one of the reasons that I specifically wanted you ladies to talk about this topic is you're in the loaner world like 24/7, you know,
Right.
And there's not a lot of facility. Even like you may feel like you're one of those facilities that all you ever do is loaners, but you're probably not to the level of Vested Medical is, because that is your bread and butter. That's how you're supporting all of those services. So really interesting. Like I know that's going to come up, that kind of nuance in the conversation, but what it does give you particular insight in that you're able to focus on this topic like few other departments are, to really get the processes tight, to really dig into the data in a way that's even beyond, hey, are we getting our trays to the hospital on time, but are we doing it in a way that's actually driving business trust and credibility with us as a provider of this service? So a lot of things to get into, but I appreciate the intros, ladies. And let's just kind of jump into it here about vendor-owned inventory management. Why is that such an important role of a sterile processing department? Like, why are vendor trays so important to what it is that we're trying to support in surgery?
Well, I mean, it's a very complex issue. Your facilities can't afford to buy all of these trays. They're expensive, number one. Number two, they're having, since COVID, it's even harder because the vendors and manufacturers are having issues with back orders, getting new trays made, new instruments made. So it's a very complex issue that, you have to try to wrap your arms around to get the trays in on time so that your techs can process correctly, so that the surgeon and the patient at the end of the day have what they need to have a successful case.
Another reason why the hospitals generally don't buy the sets is because everything is constantly getting new and improved. There's a new version of a total knee, or they've made these tweaks to this set. The latest and greatest development, by doing it as a loaner, it allows the surgeons and therefore the patients to have the best options available. The latest and greatest technology, regardless of the hospital's inventory budget.
Yeah.
That's so true. And so you have all of these trays that technicians aren't familiar with. There's new ones coming in all the time. They're highly complex and they're always coming in and out the door. So certainly complex to manage. So let's talk big picture here, ladies. What kind of metrics should the SPD folks be aware of and taking a look at with their vendor managed inventory to try to get their arms around this?
Right. So one of the biggest things is you need to have a idea of what you want to track, right? So the biggest thing is the average time of the day that these trays arrive,
which can be different by vendor.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it is great to try to put a time frame on it. You know, we need it 24 hours in advance, 48 hours in advance. So the facility needs to define the length of time that they need, but take into account the fact that not every vendor is going to be able to meet, you know, the 48 or 72. So you need to determine what your time frame is. Then you need to track and trend when they arrive, how many trays arrive per case type, for a knee, for a hip, for a revision, that type of stuff. The other big thing I think is you need to track whether they're fully cleaned or not when they arrive at your facility.
One of the other things you want to track is how many of those trays went unopened for the case. We know there are surgeons out there that want everything under the sun, and we're processing 15, 20 trays for a case when they might use 5 to 8. So by tracking that, you can look at, is it one specific surgeon, one specific vendor? You could work individually with them to pare it down. That's definitely a data point to capture.
And this can be done either electronically or manually. So I don't want people to think if they're smaller, they don't have a system. You can still track and trend manually, even though it just takes a little bit more time.
I want to go back to one of those early data points that you mentioned on the time of delivery, because you kind of called out the policies here. And I think the majority of the conversation that we hear out in the industry is, hey, you just need a policy. You just need a policy. Put a policy in place. But you actually kind of went a different direction and said, hey, the first thing you need to do is just start tracking what these delivery times are. But then you said something that I kind of want you to explain maybe a little bit is not every vendor can get it there at the same time. So what did you mean by that? And maybe like, what's the why behind that? Why would one vendor be able to do it and maybe another one wouldn't?
Well, I'll take this one. Depending on the territory, the vendors have a certain amount of sets. And part of it comes down to where was the set used last? How fast are they having to get it from one facility to another? How fast did the facility that it was at process it so that it could be picked up? We all kind of get the silo mentality. We want it. Here's our policy. You have to follow our policy. But what we all need to remember is as well that this is one big sandbox, and there's a lot of kids playing with the same toys. So we've got to make sure that, hospital A, who's using the toys on Monday, has time to adequately clean them before they get picked up so that when hospital B gets them, hopefully within their policy time frame, that they have been adequately cleaned and delivered within their policy. But that's not always possible due to, timing of surgeon cases, vendor inventory, because as Tracy said, with the back orders across the country, thanks to our friend COVID, it's very challenging. And I remember being in a hospital and saying, but I need this here now to my vendors. And then I kind of transitioned into this space and I'm like, oh, wait a minute, there's a bigger picture.
So the biggest thing is communication, right? That's in life in general, in SPD in general, and, so forth. Communicate with the vendors, find out some of their points of issues, right? If you're in a geographical territory where the one vendor has the majority of the hospitals are using their trays, it's going to be harder for that vendor to get the trays to you early enough. where you might have a different vendor or a smaller vendor that doesn't have the majority of the cases in that territory, and those are why those vendors can get them to you earlier.
Because they got time on their hands, right?
Right.
Right. But like Tracy said, though, if you communicate with the vendor and you learn and you take the time to get to know when, plus if you're tracking the metrics, you see when they typically come there, then you can sometimes adjust your staffing to accommodate that. It's got to be a give and take relationship. I know we all want our cake and we want to eat it too. But sometimes if we give a little, it eases that burden a little bit. So if you know that this vendor who's always got a Wednesday case with Dr. So-and-so, and he's always going to bring in this many sets, and it's going to be at this time or around this time, staff that way. You know, don't beat your head against a brick wall. Make a little shift and accommodate that. And I think people would be surprised by the results of just communicating and giving a little, getting a little, and it might make a big impact. But it all starts with tracking that data, tracking those metrics.
It really sounds like y'all are trying to tell us that vendors are people too, and I'm just not sure. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, that's important, right? Communication, getting to know the reality of the market. Great call out. Who's got the majority of these surgeries out there? Who's got extra people? Maybe they have an associate that works with them, or it's a one person band and they're trying to support the whole thing. But I wanted to go back and add a nuance maybe to what this conversation is kind of assuming too, that it's very common in the industry in decontam when trays come back after surgery for us to ask, do they need these loaners for tomorrow? And if the answer is no, as far as our facility, what happens to those trays? They go to the back of the line and everything else comes through the process before those vendors that have been used in our facility that are not being used in our facility tomorrow. And then those finally come through. And like, how many times do you have vendors that are anxiously waiting and asking and pleading on the clean side? Hey, is there any way I can get these trays through? Because I need to take them across town. And there's a weird, maybe not weird, but there's an understandable lack of incentive on the part of many hospitals and many decontaminators to push those trays through efficiently because it's not on us, it's on somebody else. But then we get upset when we don't get our own trays on time from manufacturers because some other hospital across the street is doing the same thing to us. And it's just a vicious cycle. So yeah, that communication piece and just the awareness is very critical, I think, to drive these efficient workflows.
Agreed.
100%. Plus the added rigor of letting those trays sit for so long makes them that much harder to clean, and they're that much more likely then to get to the next facility and need more attention in decon than they should. We'll say that.
That makes sense. Jen, you underlined something really important about staffing and scheduling earlier when you gave the example of the surgeon who has the case on Wednesday and staffing accordingly. And so I imagine if we had all of our listeners here in the studio with us, they would want to ask you for some of those tips and tricks around OR scheduling and staffing and how you keep track of that data and how that impacts your staffing. So do you have any tips and tricks for us just in terms of how to capture the data and how to do your staffing?
Well, when I was at my previous facility, we had your typical A, B, and C shift. And not only did that lead to shift warfare, which, is a whole different topic, but everybody got really complacent and loaners just got done as they could. Once we started looking at the bottlenecks in the department and tracking the metrics of when the vendor trays were going to be there and where the other bottlenecks occur in the department, we actually went to a more staggered scheduling. So instead of the traditional A, B, and C, we staggered. You don't need your full A shift necessarily at 7 o'clock in the morning. You need somebody to come in and get the test done, somebody to get the ORs what they need. but then you stagger your shift as they come in so that you have the extra bandwidth when you have those congested periods of time, whether in decon or in assembly. Look at your numbers. You know we all know decon's not going to get busy until around 9 o'clock in the morning. First cases are coming down. They're trickling down after 8, but they're really not going to get busy until 9 o'clock in the morning. So you don't need to fully staff your decon then. If you can be doing other things or have somebody come in a little bit later, because you know a vendor typically comes in at 4 o'clock. Well, at 3 o'clock, you sent your day shift home. Afternoon shift is just getting started. You're still got a line in decon, and now you're getting all these vendor trays in. Well, if you staff for it, you have a couple extra bodies that stay later than your traditional first shift. That it really helps break the bottleneck.
Yeah, and what helped with that, because I was at the same facility that she was, is that track and trend. So we took some time, we took some months, and looked at the majority of the trays that came in from loaners. We looked at the peaks and valleys in terms of the workload coming down from the OR. And then we looked at where those areas that we were getting stuck at. You know, if you only have one sonic and 2 washers, you might need to then say, look at all this workload. We're getting so backed up, we need to look at more equipment as well. So by gathering this data and putting it in terms that the CFO, the C-suite, the OR, whoever you report to, it allows more transparency. And then that data also helped us with the technicians with changing shifts and hours, because the data showed where we needed it.
That's a controversial topic too, changing people's hours. So I can see how the data would be valuable there.
Definitely. But the added bonus of adjusting some hours, say you had somebody who was on first shift and dropping their child off at daycare to get there by 7 o'clock was always a struggle. Well, now they start at 8 o'clock, so now it's great. It's a wonderful thing. Plus, by staggering it, it helps break the shift warfare, and it's no longer them on second shift. They did it, because now you're working side by side with them. So it's
I love that.
us.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if anyone's listening and hasn't read the article that I wrote on shift wars, I actually did one on that. And yeah, that's a huge issue across the board in almost every department. So yeah, anything like that you can do to break down those barriers of us versus them, very beneficial to the entire team and culture. So I had a follow up here, and this is one of my other soapboxes, specialization. And so you're talking about scheduling and everything, you know, to be aligned here with what we're doing. What impact on your staff, you know, who is specialized in vendor inventory, do you think that has had on your ability to be efficient, maybe more efficient than the average sterile processing department that has to do 100 other million things besides vendor inventory?
What's nice about it is the fact that because the vendor, the loaner trays are our basically only trays that our techs work on. They're familiar with them. They know what to look for. They know the IFUs in and out. Your normal facility, they have so many things going on with their own hospital-owned trays, let alone all these vendor trays that come in that may have different IFUs. For example, you might have a vendor that needs to go on the sonic for 10 minutes. There's another ortho vendor out there that needs a sonic of 15 minutes. Your washer cycles could be different. So you could have a vendor A washer cycle, vendor B washer cycle. So by having it here with techs that only work on those trays, you will not have some of the quality issues that might come into play if you have people that are not as experienced or exposed to those type of trays.
We always, when I take part in meetings with prospective clients and such, hospitals that we're talking to about our services, I always tell them, you know, we specialize on those trays so that you can specialize on your hospital-owned inventory. You know, become your own specialist. focus on your inventory that you own. And one of the side benefits of offloading the loaners, or even just making the loaners less of a burden on your facility, is that then your own trays can get a little bit more attention to detail, because as we all know, as techs are moving fast, trying to get through bottlenecks, sometimes things get through. We try not to, but we're all human beings. If Vested's concept eases a little bit of that burden and we focus on the loaners, it allows the hospitals to focus on their trays. But regardless, even if you're focusing on your loaners and your trays and you're doing it all yourself, take the extra time, read the IFUs so that everything is followed. And, you have the IFUs to fall back on as your soapbox as far as why things take so long.
Yep.
They take so long because they have to.
Yep. You fall on those IFUs. It's hard for facilities as well. Not all facilities have an educator to dedicate to training, but these loaner trays, it is imperative that training and education happen, or things are going to fall through the cracks.
If the facilities are lucky enough to have an instrument tracking system, which a lot of them are now, it's great to attach the IFU to the individual trays. If you can't, I know there's an instrument tracking system out there that's huge and widely used, but you can't attach a document. You can only attach photos, which is fine. Okay, take a screenshot of the decontam part of your IFU and attach it to the trays to display in decontam, so that you get a photo of the relevant part of the IFU displayed in the relevant part of the department. That way then everybody has the information right at hand, so they don't have to go to a binder. And we know vendor trays, one source is not very well versed in vendor trays.
They're not always up to date at times because it takes time. The loaner trays, the vendors are changing their IFUs, so it's also a key to stay up to date on those.
That's such good advice, and what you're getting at is the quality management piece of it, right? How do we make sure that our trays are coming through in a quality fashion, having that information with the IFU right in front of the technician as they're processing it? And it's a challenge because it's difficult. Like you said, there are lots of different IFUs. They don't all fit into the same stream of processing that the rest of our instruments might fit into. And I don't know if any of you all have experienced this, but in facilities that I've worked in, vendor trays almost got treated with more rush and less careful attention to detail than the hospital-owned stuff. And it ought to be the other way around. And so I appreciate that emphasis. As we're thinking about those vendor trays and capturing that information about IFUs, about timing studies of how long they have to be cleaned for, about staffing related to when the trays arrive, there's a lot of data around vendor managed trays is what I'm hearing. So I feel like we are just now at the dawn of real actionable vendor managed metrics and data. So could you explain what kind of data that you all report on? Maybe who are the stakeholders that need this information, and how does that data drive decision making?
Absolutely. So the things that we track are when the trays arrive. We also track, did they come in clean? Because we want to be able to help educate the prior facility or the prior rep, all those things. We also track how long we actually track the time. How long does it take from when it hits the sink to when it's on the assembly side ready to go. So we track that. We track and trend it. We also track if an instrument is really difficult to clean. So for example, it goes through the process, but on the clean side, we noticed this still had cement on it, or this still had this on it, right? So we track that. Is it an instrument specific issue? Is it a facility issue? Is it potentially need more training in decon? That type of stuff. Then we also track the time it takes to go from assembly through sterilization. So you have the timing. How long does it take to assemble? All that good stuff. So you get a true picture of when it comes in and when it goes out, of how long it actually takes.
The other important thing to keep in mind is how long does it take to cool down to room temperature? Because with vendor trays, you're talking a lot of metal mass. And so it takes a fair amount of time to cool down. So when the OR says, how long does it take to do this tray? Yeah, it takes X amount of time from decon through the sterilizer, and the sterilizer cycle time. But there's that intangible afterward of how long does it take to cool down before you can use it, because we can't transfer them until they're down to ambient room temperature. Do a time study on that. To keep that in mind so that because that's a major piece of data, because to avoid wet trays.
Yep. The other thing that we track is how long from the end of the case to when it hits the sink, because that's important too. We need to know how long has it sat. Even though it's sprayed, you still could end up with some dried bioburden. So we like to track that as well. So as far as the stakeholders, your team, they need to see the data. It's important for them to understand the data, to understand the whys. The OR, the facilities,
infection prevention and quality.
Your surgeons are part of that as well. They need to see the data.
And you can also share it with the manufacturer partner.
100%.
Because that will help open their eyes. We have found, now that we got more into the manufacturing side, a lot of the reps, they've been around the industry for a long time, but their concept and their knowledge of sterile processing itself and what is required is minimal.
Yeah.
In all reality.
It's because they haven't seen the data that happens inside the department, like what you're talking about. If they're getting any data, it's, hey, these trays are late. That's probably the only data point that they're getting. Yeah.
Yes. Or from the surgeon
right.
of, there's a dirty such
But
and
everything
such.
else is really like they're not exactly sure what's going on between point A and point B when it hits the OR. So that's a great example of one of the questions that we're just not even going to have time to get to, but it was about continual improvement and really leveraging the data. But that's a fantastic, case study of, hey, we've got all this information. We know one of the stakeholders, the vendors, do not have access to a lot of this information. Let's start giving it to them so that on their side, they can start saying, you know what? We're seeing a spike in dirty instruments from hospital A to hospital B. Maybe we should evaluate that process and do some more education over there to help us now in hospital B. Like, there's a million different outflows just by surfacing the kinds of metrics and data that you've been bringing up here. But I want to wrap actually on a kind of fun question. Like Bobby said, we're at the dawn of a lot of intersection of technology now with data in metrics and tools to interpret those, communication tools to instantly know when a case gets scheduled, to notify reps, to bring in trays. Like, there's all these kinds of fun tools out there now. But I'm curious, because you guys, like, you have your head in the vendor space 24/7. What problems are still out there to solve? What are some things that you would say from your kind of specialization point of view? What needs more attention? What should we be investing in more? What kind of innovation should we be looking for the next 5 to 10 years in this space?
Good question. With my head in this game, like you said, day in and day out, the biggest thing I think that is going to help, and it's really not in terms of innovation, I'll let Jen handle that, but it's manufacturing vendors need more inventory. I mean, that's the biggest thing.
Way to beat a dead horse, Tracy.
I'm on board with that.
But just because we're in it so much now and we communicate with our vendors so often, we feel their struggle and their stress. They're stressed about it just as much. And you've heard of the OR nurses that like to hoard. Well, there's vendor reps that will also do that because they don't want to get yelled at by facility such and such. So I'm not going to tell my distributor that I have this extra set yet. So, I know it's not in terms of technology, but I feel their pain as well instead of just a facility pain.
I'll tell you, and then I want to hear your point of view too there, Jen, but on that piece, for the inventory piece, I think some of the innovation out there is on the manufacturing side for them to have more transparency to where their trays are. Like we've had interviews before where like you'd be shocked at how little these manufacturers know about where their inventory is. Is it in a trunk? Is it on a shelf? Is it in a garage? How many trays? Where? How long? No idea. And you would think this is 2023 and we'd have all that data, but no, there's a lot of work to do. So, that piece, just them knowing where everything is to deploy those resources more effectively, that would really help. Not necessarily solve everything. I'm not saying that yet, but that would really help that case.
And for example, one of our vendors is currently looking at RFID.
One of our manufacturer partners is looking at some RFID technology, and they're doing a little study and coming up with some interesting information.
Okay.
About where those trays are.
Okay. We can't wait. We'll stay tuned on that. What do you think, Jen? Anything else that you want to solve?
Yeah, well, when I started this role, I like to say I couldn't spell IT. Now, some people speak broken Spanish. I've learned to speak broken IT. So the one thing that I have come to appreciate is integration of systems, because everybody has their own systems and none of them talk to each other. So it's a manual process to take information from this system, from the vendor system, and put it into our vendor management system at the hospital. And then we have to take that and put it into our instrument tracking system, and then look at the EHR and all of that. And I know with HIPAA, it's a huge concern. It's a valid concern, but integration of systems and coming up with, if you don't have integration, coming up with smooth process flows and ways to still double check those manual processes, because they're pitfalls waiting to happen.
Right. Well, what an exciting time to be in sterile processing. We say that often. It's a frustrating time too for many other reasons, but it's also an exciting time because all this stuff is happening that we just talked about. It's happening right now. There's innovators paying attention to it. There's creative, passionate clinicians like yourselves that are in the midst of it, trying to kind of raise the alarm and say, hey, we need this. We want this. This is going to help. And it's all coming together at once. So we know, and we've heard on Beyond Clean, that a lot of those kinds of folks listen to the show, and they're like listening, taking notes, saying, oh, okay, so they need these kind of things. They want these kind of solutions. So if there's anyone out there listening to this episode, please, on behalf of everyone in sterile processing, help us solve some of these remaining problems. If there's folks like that, or maybe just clinicians on the hospital side that have questions for you, maybe even vendor representatives want to pick your brain about the metrics, how do they get in touch with you ladies?
They can email me at tracy.raymond@vested-medical.com, and I would be happy to help.
Or email myself at jen.barnickel@vested-medical.com. Just remember, don't pickle the nickel. Email won't go through.
Don't pickle the nickel. I love it. Okay, ladies, thank you so much for spending a couple moments of your time today on Beyond Clean. And something tells me this is the first time and not the last time that we're going to have you on the show. So we can't wait to get you back again to continue everything else that we did not even get to in this conversation.
Sounds great.
Fantastic. We look forward to it.
And that was Tracy Raymond and Jen Barnickel. Don't pickle the nickel, as Jen says, after reaching out to her via email. Bobby, what a great, fun conversation today. We got to run into the ladies at the Nashville conference here recently, and they're a lot of fun in person, but they're a lot of fun on the podcast too, with great insight about, one of the hottest topics out there for as long as vendors have been coming into SPD. We've been trying to figure out the process and improvement, and great ideas and great insight shared today.
Yeah, it sounds like they've really been down in the weeds of it for a while, and appreciated some of those insights. I wish we had more time because I wanted to keep picking their brains, particularly Tracy's comment about tracking on paper. I know there's a lot of departments suffering out there who are thinking, man, it would be nice to have all that data they were talking about, and there's ways to get it. But yeah, really good interview.
Yeah, as I brought up in kind of my follow-ups, getting that data in the hands of these vendors. And I know that you may think, they're not going to want to know this data. Well, you don't know unless you gather it all up and you put it in front of them. And I know one of the most effective ways that we've used data in the past for vendors is to publicly post data with all the manufacturer's information, because I'll tell you what, Zimmer's really curious to know what Stryker's up to and what they're good at and what they're maybe not so good at in terms of the instrumentation piece. So there's a lot of, shall we say, self-policing among the vendor clientele out there too. So there's fun things you can do with data that we did not get into that maybe we can do for round 2 when we bring the ladies back. But for now, that's going to wrap it for this episode of Beyond Clean. This is a CE approved episode, so make sure to take your CE quiz and get your CE credit at the end of this. If you're not already subscribed to the show, track us down at Beyond Clean Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Google, iHeartRadio, all those other fun podcast things you listen to, or you can download our mobile app on Android and iPhone, Beyond Clean. And if you like these kinds of conversations, but you're interested to hear conversations in the OR, check out our First Case podcast talking about all things OR. Or you can listen to the Power Supply show talking about healthcare supply chain, or even our transmission control show talking about infection prevention in our space. A ton of fun podcasts out there today, all in the family, all about educational concepts that help you on the front line fighting dirty each and every day. If you've got an idea for a future podcast episode or maybe a guest, let us know at info@beyondclean.net, and make sure that you're tuning in for any upcoming events, webinars, and conferences that we have in queue for you. We got it going on all the time, so track us down online through the Facebook and LinkedIn pages, and you'll be updated on all the fun things that we're sharing on a regular basis through Beyond Clean. All right, with that, we're going to wrap it up. And on behalf of Bobby and our whole team here at Beyond Clean, we want to encourage you to keep fighting dirty.